you're the founder of Heidi. Now, as someone myself who lives and breathes compliance, how someone like you in the architecture of creating Heidi, how do you factor in compliance to your vision of Heidi and how it's been built?
Yeah, I think we've always viewed it as very important. We are ambitious. We do try to push the bleeding edge of what's possible to try to give clinicians time back. But there is a balance. Like, I think back to this whole being clinicians, we understand the danger of, slightly maybe too ambitious, like the kind of like classic startup, like move fast and break things doesn't really work in healthcare. You need to, before you release things, anticipate what's the likely implication, what's the damage you could do. Even like ignoring any of the actual legal aspects of it, more just from at least this is how I take it, from a clinical perspective, what's the implication of insert feature? Like if we let someone use a different language, what's the implication if the clinician maybe doesn't speak that language? Or how do we handle giving someone the ability to edit their notes through something like Ask Heidi, which I love, but then obviously making sure that that's launched within some constraints and make sure that it's performing in a way that we want it to be used.
Let me dig deeper on one of the key questions we get about consent. And consent to use Heidi within a consultation. What's your position on that?
I think it's really important. Like, I used to record even before Heidi my consents, because I worked in surgery, so you do lots of explanation of procedures and risks and benefits. So I would always obviously tell my patients, like, look, I'm going to record this just for our memory. And I do think that's the way to frame it. Like, it's a mutual benefit. I'm using Heidi, transcribing. They're not going to use your personal identifiable data for anything. It's just purely to create my notes. And the benefit of that is I can share a summary with you at the end of your visit, or I can show you what it writes. And then I can focus on you during the visit. So yeah, really, really important to consent your patients. That's why we have heaps of great resources. And a way to turn it on physically in the product if you want to, like Heidi, to block you. I've actually been surprised how little it has been an issue for most of our users. Going into this, my impression was that people would be worried about, being recorded, especially in a clinical scenario. And obviously there's no actual audio recording, but you still see the blinking red and the mic on, and there's that feeling. But yeah, it's I don't know whether it's Zoom meetings during COVID or like what happened, but it seems like people are getting more comfortable with the idea of being transcribed.
Do you think part of that is the education piece and educating clinicians in that this is actually what's happening during their consult, and there is no, I guess you mentioned audio recordings before, there's no magical audio recording floating around in some server somewhere. Is that education piece and educating clinicians an important part in gaining that consent? Yeah,
I think people are very skeptical because they've heard of stories where, I don't know, there's a lot of like big tech companies that have kind of damaged the reputation of just software in general and how they use and treat data. But I think healthcare is different. Like, the stakes are different. That's why we spend, that's why we're doing this. That's why there's so much time and thought that goes into how we treat both the clinician's data, but also patient data. I'm optimistic that, if we do the right thing and we spend lots of time talking to people about compliance, how we see it and what we do, and try to set a standard for others, that hopefully people will feel more comfortable with using Heidi in their practice.